I beg you to try it, Patricia.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricia. You dare once in your life.
Hey people, Trish Wood here. And I am still just kind of climbing out of the dark pit of having a pretty uncomfortable case of COVID. My health is not in jeopardy, but I feel still pretty crappy. So I just wanted to say thank you for all the lovely, lovely notes of worry and encouragement. I have been much less vocal and present in my social media feeds, obviously, and in the subscriber platforms, because what's kind of been happening to me is I'm able to kind of muster a show. And that's about it. And just to give you probably more information than you actually care to hear, I recorded the interview for today's show yesterday and am recording this today because I actually couldn't do both things. That's how bad the fatigue has been from this thing. So I'm marching forward on a bunch of stuff we're trying to get me back to normal, but I don't want anybody who loves this show and cares about us to, A, to think we're slacking off or not, but B, to think that there's somehow less interest on our part in bringing you that material. It's absolutely not true. It's really a question of me fighting for energy to be able to do it, but it gets better every week. And, I'm sure in a couple of weeks I'll be fine, but I just wanted you to know, I know my voice sounds somewhat different. My breathing probably sounds somewhat different. And I'm probably less funny than usual too, just because I feel less funny because I feel rotten. But, the podcast is the primary focus of the life right now. So we're never letting that go, but you're just going to get less goodies, which means less writing and other things, live shows and that sort of stuff. So I hope you can just bear with us and be patient while I sort this out. It's kind of complicated. Our guest today is someone I've been trying to schedule in for quite a while. Her name is Catherine Austin Fitz, and I admire her very much. She's a really, really interesting person. She was an investment banker, big shot on Wall Street, massively, and became the Assistant Secretary of Housing in Washington. She became a whistleblower about government fraud and stepped away from that world when she realized, I'll put it really simply, just that kind of the globalists and the global bankers were up to no good. And she noticed that and saw evidence of it decades before we did. I was only awakened to the peril of the kind of global elite thinking, which is utter disdain for us and an agenda of their own. I only got awakened to that really around COVID, partly, I guess, maybe during the Trump presidency, the pushback against him. But I think mostly it's because of the lockstep draconian COVID policies that really awakened me to that. But she has been on top of it for a very, very long time. She's got some very, very interesting ideas about it. She runs something called the Solari Report. It's a newsletter you can subscribe to. And she also does something that I totally agree with, and that she suggests as part of a pushback against the move towards digitizing everything, which means controlling us all, to using only cash on Friday. And I utterly support that. I think it's a great idea. It's one small way that we can assert our independence from being monitored and controlled by banks and governments and globalists and everybody else. Just use cash. It drives them crazy. And it's really, really good for small business too, right? So think about doing that. I think it's really fun. And I know that Catherine Austin Fitz will support you in that. Anyway, her newsletter is called the Solari Report, Solari. She lives in Amsterdam, and she was a really fun interview, which we'll get to in a minute. Our show last week got a big, big response. It was the debate around the article published in the CMAJ suggesting that vaccinated people were in peril should they mix with unvaccinated people. Mixing is the word used in the study. It's not one that I would use. And we had Denis Rancourt and Byram Bridle on, who both saw methodological flaws, but different methodological flaws, which was interesting. So they had a really cool debate that got a lot of attention. I also went back to the CMAJ website and looked at the response from other professionals in various parts of this kind of science, and there has been a lot of pushback against this piece on the CMAJ. So that leads us to an ethical question. And the ethical question is this. I know that and this is what we tried to facilitate, that in science, of course, debate is wonderful and they don't always agree and they shouldn't always agree. And the more pushback, the better on this kind of an idea. But here's what I will also say. You guys and I all know that that paper is going to be used by people like Justin Trudeau and his ilk who want to keep us mandated to getting vaccines before we can do a whole bunch of stuff. And in this country, for our listeners outside the country, we have many, we can't get on airplanes even to fly domestically because of Justin Trudeau's mandates, for which here is the rub and why this study is so key right now. There's no medical justification for it anymore. Canada is a hugely vaccinated population. If you believe vaccines work the way they say they do, clearly they don't. But even if you believe that, I think we're almost at like 90% or something. Do correct me if I'm wrong. And that means that the so-called unvaccinated, how many of them have had COVID by now with Omicron racing through? I mean, even I got it. Everybody's had COVID, so they've got natural immunity. Given those two facts, given the fact that the vaccines do not stop transmission in a significant way, that most of the people getting COVID these days are vaccinated, obviously because there are more vaccinated people, but they are getting COVID. Why on earth are mandates still in place? You absolutely cannot medically justify them whatsoever anymore. So what this study does, what it does is it gives the mandate fanatics an alleged scientific underpinning for them to keep them going. They say, well, you know, the unvaccinated are imperiling the vaccinated. We have to protect those who, as the Prime Minister says, who stood up and did the right thing. And this study gives them a way out. And here's where I'm going with this. Sorry to be so long-winded today, but that is why this paper is so important, because it affects massively public policy. It's not a kind of an arcane hypothetical that people will only be debating. It will be used as a last resort weapon to keep mandates in place. And so I believe that there needs to be some kind of renewed, perhaps remedial look at this study beyond just letting people post on the CMAJ, excuse me. I don't know what that is, and I'm not trying to imply, nor should you infer, that there were some nefarious motives for this paper being written. I don't believe that. I have no evidence for that. I think Dr. Fissman, who is the lead author on it was well intended. I just happen to think he's wrong. And other people who know more than I do also think he's wrong. And the flaws in the study are easy even for a layman to see. So there needs to be, I believe, ethically some move by the CMAJ to either reinforce what the study is suggesting with more studies, if they exist, and I don't believe they do, or they need to find a remedial out editorially So this study can't improperly be used to maintain mandates that are no longer supported by the epidemiological data. So I think that's where we have to go now. There is a general rebuke of what's happened. And look, I'll say again, if Dr. Fisman wants to come on the show and defend it and bring people on to defend it, I'm all ears. I'm dying to hear. And we are proud of how fair we are on this show. But I'm not saying it's indefensible. I don't know enough. I'm not a scientist, but given the pushback against it, it's troublesome. And I think something more needs to be done or should be done. Only my opinion. The interesting thing that happened this week for me, as a former kind of mainstream journalist, is that for the first time, really in recent memory, I saw very, very interesting questioning in the House of Commons about the vaccine mandates. It is the kind of questioning I would have done, I like to think I would have done anyway, if I was still doing that for a living, but now we actually have the Conservative opposition party asking questions journalists should also be asking and pressuring the Prime Minister, who is petulantly and stubbornly sticking to mandates that don't have a justification. So I just want you to listen. So the first one I have is Melissa Lanceman.
Member for Thornhill.
And stigmatize, rinse, and repeat. Which experts is the Prime Minister listening to? What is the specific advice? What year is the advice from? And why is the advice different in Canada than the rest of the world?
Great.
It's all secrets, Mr. Speaker. Canadians want to know, when will this government end the outdated, ineffective, and vindictive mandates?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Conservative Party talking an awful lot about divisions amongst Canadians, but that hasn't been the experience of most Canadians who stepped up to over 90% to get vaccinated, who demonstrated every step of the way that they were there for their neighbours.
Let me just hold on a sec. Just hold on a sec. Again, I've said, talk to your whips and get on the list for question period. Be more than happy to have other questions asked in this House of Commons. Let me go on to l'honorable député de Belleuil-Chambly avec sa question.
La semaine dernière, en présence du Premier ministre, les journalistes ont demandé au Premier ministre du Québec s'il comptait toujours revendiquer. Voulez-vous que je vous laisse régler les affaires avant? Parce que...
apparemment, je n'ai pas quitté le Premier ministre à répondre à sa question. Mais j'ai pensé que c'était fini. Non, c'était pas fini? OK, je reprends avec le Premier ministre pour répondre à la question de Mme de Thornhill. Et puis, the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, like I said, the Conservatives never miss an opportunity to try and pretend that Canadians are divided, when in fact, Mr. Speaker, Canadians were united to 90-degree vaccination rates, to pulling together for their neighbours, to following public health rules, to being there for each other. And that's why Canada pulled through better than many countries from this pandemic, why our economy is coming back so strongly. That's why we will continue to listen to experts. That's why we will continue to have Canadians' backs.
So what a disgusting answer. I have to say, it's just, there's so much wrong with how he answered very, very specific questions based on him having to justify an ongoing policy that has no merit. The first thing he did, I'm just going to take this apart. The first thing he did was talk about a suggestion he was trying to make that the Conservatives were dividing the country. Then he went about dividing the country by indicating that people who got vaccinated were heroic and that the other people who didn't, there was something wrong with them. That's the suggested. So who's doing the dividing here? He's doing the dividing here. And why, if the vaccines actually stop transmission, is getting a vaccine heroic? It shouldn't be heroic. It should be, based on one of the stories they tell about them, it's self-protective. So why is it heroic then? That argument makes absolutely no sense. They throw all of these talking points into a pot to avoid answering the very, very, very important points that Melissa Lantsman was making. Who is advising you on this? What is the advice, and what is that advice based on? Where is the so-called science that suggests that people are safer because unvaccinated people are not allowed to board a plane or a train in this country, either domestically or on a foreign trip? Where's the evidence for that? Other countries are now peeling that off. Does that mean they don't care, that they're allowing their citizens to die, that they've, we just look like idiots. And this kind of performance by our prime minister and the ministers in his cabinet on this issue is embarrassing. And the Liberal Party should feel embarrassed. Now, let me say, because we do talk politics on the show, I'm not particularly political, right? I'm kind of a libertarian now. I think they're all, sort of horrific. But it is a Liberal government in power imposing all of these absurd rules on people that they cannot justify, and using the argument of science as the trigger that they're pulling, but they never show us the respect of actually explaining even who. Is it coming from Dr. Tam? Who is telling them to keep the mandate on that prevents Canadians from boarding aircraft and trains in this country, right? We were not even allowed to know that. He just does his talking points. Anyway, sorry for that rant. Also, an MP named Arnold Viersen took on the transport minister again on this very subject. And here's how that exchange went.
Peace River, Wexlock.
Mr. Speaker, Argentina, Costa Rica, Denmark, Hungary, Jamaica, Thailand, Mexico, Norway, and Poland. These are a few of the many countries that have ended all their vaccine mandates. Even citizens of Cuba, a country with an interesting connection to the Prime Minister, have more freedom to travel than Canadians. However, the Liberal government maintains one of the most restrictive vaccine regimes around the world. On what day will 7 million Canadians get to fly again?
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Speaker, my honourable colleague never agreed with any of the public health measures we put in place. He never supported vaccine mandates.
Order. I think we just let the minister answer, and we can ask another question if time. So you can get on the list. It's easy. Talk to your whip, and you can get on the list. The Honourable Minister of Transport.
So, Mr. Speaker, let me just say, these measures are temporary, and we'll always consult our public health experts on how to proceed forward. But let me just say to my honourable Conservative colleagues, they can't, on the one hand, agree that vaccines save lives, and on the other hand, call them vindictive measures. That doesn't add up, Mr. Speaker. They have to tell Canadians that they believe that vaccines save lives. Do they agree with that or not, Mr. Speaker?
So that is our Transport Minister, Omar Al-Gabra. And, his talking point, how can you say you agree that vaccines save lives, but that mandates work? I mean, it's that kind of oversimplicity, the absolute stupidity of that comment that is an insult to all Canadians, even if you completely buy into vaccines. The idea is that they will save some lives. They will save, maybe, the lives of the people who are vulnerable of dying of COVID. But most people won't die of COVID. And if vaccines are working the way they're supposed to do, which means they're protecting the person who took the shot, then it shouldn't matter that everybody else has taken it. If it's not doing that, if it's failing, and it's not preventing transmission from person to person, then how can you make an argument for mandates either? There's no way out. That's what they call a tautology, right? It's a circular argument. And the way that they speak about vaccines now in the House in this country is an absolute insult. And I believe every Canadian, regardless of their position on vaccines, should be up in arms at the infantile and dishonest way that they are now talking about public health policy in this country. It's just embarrassing. It's embarrassing. Now, that argument happened. Those arguments happened, by the way, and this is why I'm so upset today. Before the FDA yesterday decided finally that J&J is a product that causes more blood clots that they were comfortable with and that it should be severely, severely restricted, right? So let me just say this to you. And as you know, I'm not a person who says I told you so, but I'm going to say I told you so, not on my behalf, but on behalf of all of the people who were questioning the foreshortened vaccine test trials, because that's all got jumbled up. All the reporters who were so pro-vax chanting safe and effective, blood clots are rare, which they're still rare. Whose word is that? And who defined rare, right? All those people who from day one have been suggesting that people who were saying, let's be judicious about this. Let's perhaps have a stratified rollout of the vaccines for people who really need them instead of risking the health and the lives of people who don't, right? The point is that when you have foreshortened safety and efficacy trials, as all of the vaccines did, you don't know what's going to happen a year down the road because you don't have that data. And here's what we now know, and this is what the J&J FDA decision tells us, and it's what people like me and others who have covered the pharmaceutical industry and its mistakes and errors and lawsuits, etc. Here's what we were saying. We were saying you can't have long-term data without long-term studies, and whatever bad things are showing up, whatever signals are showing up now are only going to get worse later, right? Efficacy is going to fall off, and whatever safety problems were signaled are only going to get bigger. That's what we said as time goes on, because that's what long-term studies are for. So that's exactly what's happened here, and we were pilloried for it. The so-called anti-vaxxers were actually right to be somewhat skeptical and asking for the rollout to be judicious. That's why many of us were against all mandates. It should be a choice if someone's going to take a product that has not been fully studied. I went back today and looked at how many times the J&J vaccine was called safe and effective by the media, by politicians, by John Tory, the mayor of Toronto, by all of the vaccine pushers in this country, like they knew something that was unknowable, right? It was all part of a big PR campaign, and PR campaigns have no place in public health. So that's where we are now. Just before we get to the wonderful Catherine Austin Fitts, I want to talk to you about supporting us. You know, you're not going to get a lot of goodies in the next 2 weeks just because I'm struggling, as I said, but we still do need your support very, very much to keep the lights on around here and allow us to keep the podcast going. Our audience is growing, which is brilliant. I'm so grateful for that. And I love being able to interact with people, although I have less lately, you'll notice, but I have read everything that's come in. So I'll just keep this brief today. We have a PayPal and we have a Patreon. And on my website, which you should also subscribe to, by the way, it's free. And you can either go to PayPal or Patreon. And we really appreciate the people who do the subscriptions that roll over every month, because then we know we have some idea what's going to be coming in every month and we can plan. So I'd be very, very grateful. Subscribe on our website. You can email me at info@trishwoodpodcast.com. If you've sent me an email in the last, let's say 6 weeks that you needed an answer to and I didn't get to it, do email again and I'll, to quote Jen Psaki, I'll circle back and make sure you get an answer. And we're just very grateful for your support and kindness. And off we go. So Catherine Austin Fitts, she talks about a lot of really, really interesting things. And she's kind of the voice of the moment for me. I've been doing a lot of reading about the WEF and the G7. I've had CJ Hopkins and other really smart anti-globalist voices on. And she covers a lot of that ground from a really interesting way because she was on Wall Street making the big bucks as an investment banker. So she knows these people and she knows monetary policy really well. So here is my interview with Catherine Austin Fitts. And unfortunately, we start by talking about my COVID. So if you can live through that. Sorry. Okay, here we go. Hi, Catherine. How are you?
Hi, Trish. It's so nice to meet you. I've been doing research on your different shows and work. Oh, very impressive. Very impressive.
Well, and I luckily got through to you, not having your email address because of CJ Hopkins, right? Who I'm very, very big on. I mean, he's terribly smart. And he said, oh, yeah, we're friends. So it was wonderful that I was able to get a message to you to do the show.
Oh, anybody that CJ recommends as strongly as he recommended you is going to get a big response from me because he's a fellow ex-New Yorker and a person of just amazing intellectual power. It's the only way I can say it.
Well, he's also funny. Yes. Which is nice, right?
Right. Did I ever tell you he saved my life during the election?
No.
The presidential elections in America are one of the most depressing events in my life. And reading his essays, I would laugh until he'd cry. And he's one of those people who put me to a point where I realized, oh my God, what if the neighbors saw me laughing this hard? Maybe I should shut the blinds before I continue reading C.J. Hopkins.
I know, he's great. And he's got, you have a phrase, I think your phrase is Mr. Global, I think.
Right, Mr. Global.
Yeah, and his is Globocap. So everybody's kind of coming up with their great ways to describe this kind of terrible mess we're in, which we'll get to in a minute. But just before we started rolling, I was doing what I do a lot of these days, which is whinging and moaning about not getting better from COVID, which I actually feel terrible about because I was shitting on long COVID, saying that can't be real. They're just using that to, ugh. But I am 65 and I am not thin partly because of the lack of exercise during COVID period. But anyway, I am quite sick. And you were very kindly suggesting that I look up a chap named Wim Hof, who has a way of getting us into really good shape. So do please tell me about that, because I know our listeners, many of them are struggling like I am.
So Wim Hof, I have dear friends, and Wim Hof and his training and his method is something that has spread virally for years and years. So right now I'm in the Netherlands. Everyone knows Wim Hof because they've done it, or somebody in their family has done it with huge success. So This is something that works for many, many people, and it spreads virally. Anyway, I had dear friends who had studied with Wim Hof. They'd gone to some of his events. He has a retreat center in Poland. He's based in the Netherlands, and he has a big compound here, but then he has a retreat center in Poland, does retreats in Thailand as well. And they kept trying to get me to do it. And I'm one of those people, life has been difficult enough without contemplating getting into a cold bath full of ice.
Got it. Yeah.
And my attitude was, I love my warm shower in the morning. It's one of the few solaces in my life. I can't, life is too hard. Anyway, so I resisted for a long period of time. And then I had a boating accident last summer. And Trish, I really went down. And I had not been used to having chronic pain. And I said, I need to get radical because something, I'm sliding. And so I got a hold of the new Wim Hof book with the Wim Hof method. And I'm somebody, I really need to have an intellectual basis of something before I try it.
Yeah.
And this book really helped me understand it's breathing exercises, it's cold therapy, and he uses meditation, I use prayer, but it's, essentially deep thinking and sort of connecting to your spiritual stuff. Anyway, so I began to try it, and it was amazing, the change in my health, in my energy. Every day I do Wim Hof, I tend to have 15% more energy. Anyway, so I got very excited about it. And one of the people who had introduced me to Wim Hof was the host of our Future Science series, which is one of our most popular series on the Slayer Report, Ulrich Groniger, who's German. And so Ulrich got an interview with Wim Hof. She and Wim Hof know each other well from their time in the retreats. And we decided to make him Hero of the Year on the Solari Report. And he's on the cover of our annual wrap-up. You can see it on our website, and we'll be sending it to the printer at the end of this month. And so we went down to his compound and did an interview. If you go to Solari, it's up on Solari. I put the link in the chat so you can post it if you want. And it's public. Anyway, so we did our interview, made him Hero of the Year, put him on the annual wrap-up, which will come flying out hopefully sometime early summer. And I announced to the subscribers, we had at the beginning of the year, I sort of do a wrap-up and say what our goals for the year is. And I said, we see the people who've been harmed by COVID, whether it's the COVID-19 or harmed by the injections or harmed by the disaster capitalism and the lockdowns and restrictions. Anybody who's been harmed by any of this, the first 200 people who invite us to, we'll send them a copy of the Wim Hof method because we think this can help a lot of them. And if you're willing to try, we're willing to make an investment of, sending you a copy. So we got 200 copies. And I told you we have a few more, so I'm going to send you a copy.
Thank you.
And because I said we're up against tyranny, and I think the people who've been harmed by tyranny, that's our army. They're an opportunity. So we want to invest in you, and we want you to. We think if we team up, we can become an army against this kind of tyranny. So anyway, so that's Wim Hof, and this morning I did Wim Hof. And,
so tell me what doing Wim Hof means. What actually do you do?
So I do breathing exercises, which is accelerated deep breathing. And I try to do either 4 sets of 30 or 4 sets of 40. He has breathing apps. The breathing app I usually use is 3 sets of 30. So it's anyway from 3 sets of 30 to 4 sets of 40. Many people do different variations on this, but it's breathing exercises. And then I do a cold shower. He also has cold baths and other forms of cold therapy, including jumping in the ocean, or I live right next to the IJsselmeer, which is a big, huge inlet. It's part of the ocean that's been diked off. So it's a sweetwater, huge, I don't know if you'd call it a bay or inlet. Anyway, but some people in my community just go run and jump in the IJsselmeer every morning. So, but it's basically cold therapy. And
so does it, just sort of interrupt for a second, Catherine, and ask you quickly, how do you make yourself get into the cold shower? Because it feels like that would be really unnatural, and you would have to really force yourself. And then if you could also let me know if it's anything like this cryogenic of these people getting into these like ice cold frozen tanks.
I don't know, because I don't know anything about cryogenics, but what I do, and some people just go straight to cold shower. I love my nice warm shower. Yeah. So the first thing I do after the breathing exercises is I take my nice warm shower, and then I top it off with anywhere from a minute to 3 minutes of just ice cold shower.
Wow.
and I assure you, where I am, the water is very cold. I was in Sweden 3 weeks ago, and oh my God, it was like liquid ice. So I do I top it off with a cold shower. And here's the interesting thing. And everybody who does Wim Hof, people used to tell me this and I didn't believe them. once you get used to doing it, whenever I do both the breathing exercises and the 1 to 3 minutes of cold shower all day long until I go to bed, I have 10 to 15% more energy. It's like a turbo overcharge. And once you get used to having that, I told you it's like my old college roommates, time capsule Dexedrine. Once you get used to having that, you look forward to the cold shower, because I know if I do that cold shower, I'm going to have, and it's funny because when it happens, the first hit of the water, it's like you want to scream, which I'm free to do given where I live. It's like, ah!
Yeah.
and then it feels like all those demons are just getting chased out of you.
Wow.
It's just completely cleansing you energetically, and any sort of negative psychic garbage that stuck to you yesterday or the day before or overnight, bam, it's, all that garbage has to get out, and it's a cleansing. I really look forward to it. It's fun.
And is there in the book or anywhere in his teachings an explanation of the physiological mechanism, or is it more mystical than that?
No, it gives a very good practical explanation. For people who really want to go deep, I would recommend a book by Scott Carney called What Doesn't Kill Us. Scott Carney was a reporter whose sort of expertise was in outing healthcare charlatans. And he went to a Wim Hof retreat in Poland with an assignment from Playboy, and his mission was to out Wim Hof. And he fell in love with Wim Hof and spent the next couple of years sort of exploring his methods and talking to the doctors and scientists who were doing research. One of the reasons that Wim Hof is becoming so popular, Trish, is he has 4 kids who work in his business, and the business is run by his oldest son. It's really a remarkable person in his own right. And he persuaded his dad to take the time to really spend a lot of times with doctors and scientists, teaching them what he was doing and having them be able to research and test his methods and figure out why they were working. And so there's been an incredible investment by scientists and doctors in his methods and exploring his methods. And that's what's really sort of, he was moving virally before, but the doctors are coming back and saying, the textbooks were wrong and Wim Hof is right.
Wow.
It's quite remarkable. And Carney explains a lot of it. You get some in Wim Hof's book. You get even more when you read Carney.
That's really, I'm Finnish by background. And of course, these are people who believe in jumping in cold water. They do the sauna.
Absolutely.
And then and they really very hearty, very healthy, mostly alcoholic. Right. But it sort of runs in the family. But that's been part of the kind of Finnish tradition forever. And they're healthy people. So there's something.
The Swedes too.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're big jumping in the ocean in the middle of the winter.
Yeah.
It was funny. I have to tell you this, if you're Finnish, I was just in Sweden and I was meeting with a wonderful Swedish ally, and we were talking, and he had just come back he's describing just coming back from Finland. And I realized, I said to him, Sweden is only 10 million people, but I've traveled extensively all my life. I love to travel. And wherever I go, there's Swedes. The Swedes are everywhere. And I said, I've never bumped into a Finn, ever.
Yeah.
They just stay at home. What's the deal?
Yeah.
Anyway, so.
No, it's true. It's true. And they also live very communally. My grandfather was, this is actually a true story. He was shanghaied and taken to sea when he was a teenager and ended up on the coast of British Columbia, Canada, as a fisherman over the years, and in a socialist settlement called Sointula, which is way, way, way up in the bush. And that's kind of how they live. Like Finns tend to live in community. I'm sure that's not true now, but there wasn't at least a lot of mixing in that way. And they're very dour. Have you seen the 60 Minutes piece on the Finnish tango obsession that happened about 20 years ago?
No.
Well, it's a brilliant
No.
piece. It's Morley Safer, who, of course, was a genius writer. But and you can find this on YouTube. Just type in Finnish tango obsession. So these people who are kind of not very smiley, who never would even hold hands with their wives. They're so like non-expressive, right? My father called my mother the frozen Finn. But they go to these tango parlors, right? It was a huge fad in Finland. So they would kind of step out of their real lives as these kind of non-responsive, chilly people and do this very dramatic, kind of passionate dance. No one could explain it, but it took over the country. And Morley Safer did a brilliant, very funny piece on it.
Oh, I have to find that.
Yeah, you must look it up. Anyway, so let's move on. I want to talk to you before we get into I really want from you an explanation about what we're living through now. But before we do that, I just wanted to comment on something you said in another interview that was very moving to me. You said that the only way to counter and to kind of overtake the big, scary, kind of big tech coup that's happened is with spirituality. And I've been thinking that and there's a piece in the Financial Times of London about a monk who is an advisor to the Pope on AI, right? And he's so interesting. He said, we cannot move forward unless all of the religious leaders get together and talk about what moral framework we're going to put around this technology. And he was kind of saying what you were saying, but I thought it was really interesting that you kind of bottom lined what's happening to us with the idea that we need a spiritual push, because no one really talks about that anymore.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is the world feels very secular right now. People don't necessarily see a spiritual solution to the problems we're having.
So the way I would describe it, and it's hard to know where the line, begins and ends on spiritual versus energetic, but I would say that most of us alive today have been raised and trained as hyper-materialists. I came up a ladder and ended up as a partner on Wall Street, and I would say I was a pretty hyper-materialist person. That was my world. But if you looked at most of my success working with financing and markets, it was because I understood that markets in the human race are driven by energetics and fields, not by, intellectual numbers of money. It's much deeper than that. And I'm happy to give some examples of that. But, our world is both energetic and spiritual as well as material. And trying to look at it as if it's a material world only. This notion that human beings are computers and act like computers, it's complete madness and just not true. One of the reasons we have a future science series on the Solari Report is to explore the science around our energetic bodies and how we share information and knowledge, and what that aspect is sort of building a vision of spiritual and science together that aligns with each other.
Give me some examples of what you were talking about on Wall Street.
Okay, so I'll give you two examples. Well, let me go back to Wall Street. What used to happen on Wall Street when you wanted to do, my claim to fame was doing sort of novel financings that people said couldn't be done. And the process of doing it was you would take let's call it a financial ecosystem where you have 25 different players. Some are private, some are government agencies, some are just investors. You have all these different players and their incentives are out of alignment. If you look at what their risk profiles are, if you look at what their incentives are, nothing can get done because there's no way to get them to cooperate. And the way you build a new financing is you figure out how to realign the different organizations in a way that take care of sort of their macro risks and their micro risks, but make the whole thing go. Because if everybody gets into a new alignment, the economics are so attractive, you can sort of put pie on the board that everybody can eat. In other words, by realigning the different groups, you can create so much more economic value that everybody can get paid back from the change that comes by realigning. So one of the financings that I was most famous for was helping to capitalize the New York City subway and bus system and then computer rail system. They needed to finance a major capital program, but nobody believed they could afford the debt. And it was a matter of just building a new alignment between the state government, the local government, the different agencies, and the businesses that depended on the system to go. Because New York could never work without, a public transportation system that really works.
Yeah.
And so, it's a matter of, anyway, so that's an example. But let me take it down and give you some smaller examples.
Okay.
That sort of look into this. One was I was in the City of London at an investment conference long ago, and a money manager got up and told this story, and I was so impressed with it. It took me years. I have a client who's a Jung expert, and he found the reference in one of Jung's books, and it's up on our website under the title Karma Means You Don't Get Away with Anything, and so you can find it on a search. So here's the story. Jung had a patient come to see him who was dressed in a very aristocratic, elegant way, clearly very wealthy. And she came in, she'd made an appointment without giving her name, and she told Jung that she was only going to see him once, so there was no need for him to know her name. And here was a story. As a young woman from a very aristocratic family, she had gone to medical school. And after graduating from medical school, had fallen in love with her best friend's husband and couldn't tolerate the tension. And so to reconcile the tension, she, being a doctor, knew how to do it. She poisoned her best friend. And shortly after her best friend died, she married the husband and then got pregnant. And from there on out, everything in her life started to go wrong. The husband died before she had her child. She had a daughter. Oh, she had wolfhounds who the dogs died. She was also an accomplished rider. She couldn't ride anymore because the horses would always buck. After her daughter was born, her daughter hated her. And then as soon as she could run away, had left, and she had no idea where her daughter was. And she told Jung that wherever she was, the birds would stop singing. She said the birds knew. And she hoped by coming to Jung and confessing that she could somehow clear her sins and find a way to go back into society, because she was totally isolated as a result of the field knowing and appreciating her crime.
And so what was his advice to her about it?
I have no idea. But what I will tell you is I'm often asked in America, how can we get the local economy going?
Yeah.
And I always tell them, you've got to clean the field. You've got to clear the field, because the field is completely, and when I say field, I'm thinking of, Rupert Sheldrake and morphogenic fields. Deep down inside, everyone in the field, from the animals, the plants, the people, know the crimes that we're guilty of destroyed our neighborhood in the first place. And so there's an energetic problem going on. It's spiritual and it's energetic. Anyway, that's one story. So let me tell you my other favorite story.
Yeah.
So I have a little country home in Tennessee.
Nice.
And I have a lawn in the front. And for many years, while I was litigating with the federal government, my lawn was overtaken with moles. And these moles would dig these fantastic tunnels, and people walking across my lawn would fall. Their foot would literally fall in, and it was dangerous because if they were walking fast, you could snap your knee. Anyway, so I would despair of it was a terrible symbol to have moles in my lawn. You felt like, okay, the spooks, The symbolism of the moles in my lawn was really too much. Anyway, so I kept trying all these old-timey recipes to get rid of the moles. Nothing would work. So I said to, the guy who was helping me with the lawn, he said, we're going to have to put poison down the tunnels. I said, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to poison my own land. I'm just not doing that.
Yeah.
So I called an energetic healer I know, and I explained the problem. And I said, what should I do? And she said, well, do you have a magnolia tree? I said, yeah, I have a beautiful magnolia tree in the front with white blossoms. And she said, no, do you have a magnolia tree on the side on the property line? I said, no. And she said, well, that's the problem. There used to be a pink magnolia tree there, and it died, and it left a wound on the land. And if you plant a pink magnolia tree there, it will heal the wound and the moles will go away. So, Trish, I'm a material girl. I'm from Wall Street. I'm thinking, oh, yeah, right, sure. Sure. Okay. So I love to plant trees. I'm really into planting trees. I think, if you're depressed, you can always just cheer yourself up by go planting a tree. So I order a pink magnolia tree. Seedling comes in the mail. And the guy who's helping me with my lawn plants the tree, this little pink magnolia seeding, exactly where the energetic healer said to plant it. And about a week later, my assistant comes walking in the door and she says, oh my God, you have to see this. You're just not going to believe this. It's a miracle. And we walk outside and there is the seedling and it's shimmering like it's on Fairy Hill or something, like it's covered with fairies. I mean, it's like a shimmering aura. It's angelic. You can see it. And at the very top, Trish, is this huge pink blossom that doesn't look like the pink blossom of a magnolia tree. It looks like a lotus blossom because it's totally horizontal to the ground and it's like 5 times bigger than I've ever seen a magnolia tree. And the whole thing is just shimmering. And in the meantime, I realized, oh my God, the moles are gone.
Wow.
And I'm in a state of complete shock. And I called the energetic healer and I said, oh my God, the moles are gone. And I tell her about the tree. And she said, yeah, I told you, if you planted a tree there, it would heal the wound and the moles would leave. Yeah, yeah. And I hung up the phone and I thought, this world is totally different than what I was trying.
Yeah.
Now, could it have been a remarkable coincidence? Of course. But I will tell you, as somebody who spent a lifetime trying to understand how money works, if you map out the local economy, a local economy works much more like morphogenic fields, as Rupert Sheldrake describes them, than according to market theories or capitalism. And I became convinced litigating with the federal government that the intelligence agencies understand and know that. Yeah. Because a lot of the deep state tactics is designed to stop the field from coming together and coalescing without central control.
So let's talk about that because, my listeners are people who I know are interested in a lot of the stuff that's been said on the periphery around the World Economic Forum. And of course, being in Canada, we've got this really regressive prime minister on COVID who we still have a federal travel ban. I cannot get on an airplane still because I'm unvaccinated. I can't. And they're talking about hanging on to it for 3 more years even. And even though there's no medical basis for it left, right? So some of us feel that there may be some undue influence going on, including, by the way, the prime minister's brother, who we had on the show. He's not behaving rationally around COVID-19 policy. He can't explain, nor can anybody in his government explain why they are hanging on with these regressive policies. The one connection is that he's a kind of a favorite of Schwab. So, how do we view that? What do we make of this predicament we find ourselves in with this guy?
So what you have to understand is you're dealing with a coup. You're not dealing with a health situation. So let me read you something. I want to read you a quote from a book by Michael Pye. Let me just read you. Plague Justified. So he's writing about events in the 1300s to 1500s. Plague justified the rules that kept a person in her place. We've seen how plague became the reason, just like terrorism today, for social regulation, for saying how children must behave, for taking a worker's right to choose what work he wanted, for deciding which of the poor are worthy of help and which are just wastrels. Plague enforced frontiers that were otherwise wonderfully insecure and made our movements and travels conditional. It helped to make the state a physical reality and gave it ambition. So this is a quote from a book by Michael Pye called The Edge of the World, and it's about the Northern Europe in the 1500s.
Wow.
And basically what he shows is that when they wanted to do a financial reset, they instituted plague laws, used those laws to basically control labor and capital. By centralizing the capital, they were able to build Antwerp and then Amsterdam, the great cities of Europe. And it was basically a technique of financial reset.
So what does that mean when you use the phrase financial reset? What do you mean by that?
So in August 2019, the G7 central bankers came together. Primarily G7 central bankers gather every year in Jackson Hole through one of the Fed member banks. And it's a place they go to and sort of discuss and develop policy. So at the meeting in Jackson Hole in August 2019, a group of central bankers met and voted on a plan called the Going Direct Reset. Now, the World Economic Forum, which is the Davos group, to me, is just a marketing arm of the Going Direct Reset. The real plan is driven by the central bankers.
Right.
And this is a re-engineering of how the governance system and financial system on planet Earth works. For me, it started in the 90s. I call it the financial coup, but now it's accelerating into a much more aggressive coup. The financial coup that started in 1998 was meant to be invisible to many people, and we bubbled the economy with debt so that everybody thought times were good and didn't notice sort of the change of controls that were being engineered very quietly behind the scenes. So they voted on this plan, and it is a plan which has several parts. One is massive printing of currency and debt that channels money to the insiders who are then free to buy everything up on the monopoly board, as well as demand destruction of the outsiders' companies and businesses and cash flows, so that the monetary inflation created with the money printing won't result in hyperinflation. You destruct demand. So COVID was a way of dramatically destroying demand by a certain section of society and making sure that the revenues of their businesses got transferred over to the insider's business. So let's say on a block you have a big publicly traded corporation with a big box store, and then you have 100 little businesses. You declare the 100 little businesses non-essential, and then all the customers go to the publicly traded big box store, and that runs their profits up, which runs the stock market up. And so you're playing a game of consolidating all the wealth into what George H.W. Bush used to call tighter and redder hands. And you want to, while you're in the business of destroying 1 million small businesses in America, you want to confuse people enough so they don't realize what's happening. So you tell them there's a plague and there's a disease and they're all going to die, and you're doing this to help people. And it's basically a game of economic warfare. And the more you can keep them stupid and going in circles and not understanding what's going on and keep them scared, the faster, cheaper, easier it is for you to do it.
And what's the purpose of it at the end of the day? What are they trying to achieve?
So what they're trying to achieve is a society where the resource use by an individual is much smaller. So the top, depending on where you cut the number, let's just say the top 1% get to live till they're 145, because biotechnology makes that possible. And then, the people who are not in that percent live a much less politically powerful, much less resource-rich kind of life. You reduce everybody essentially to slavery. Now, if you look at the history of slavery, understand that slavery is the most profitable business ever investment business ever created. But slavery was canceled the last time around because you couldn't perfect collateral and you couldn't put down some of the slave rebellions. Digital technology gives you the ability to perfect collateral and put down all rebellions if you can get a complete control grid into place. And so it gives them the technological ability to reduce everybody to essentially slavery. You know, and it's a mind controlled slavery. It's 2030. You'll have no assets and you'll be happy. You know, that's the vision. And the 1% can afford to live to 145, you know, and live very wealthy lives because the resource use has been so cut back in the general population.
See, I think that is absolutely true, what you just said. I did some research, and it was kind of a Hail Mary pass, but I Googled climate change and authoritarian government to see what had been written academically about that. And there is a multitude of papers saying, you know, tyranny is good if it's in service of saving the planet. Authoritarianism is good if it's going to stop climate change. And I thought, wow, you know, is that kind of, in a sense, what this is about? That I don't know if they actually believe the science behind climate change or not, or if perhaps they're just selfishly trying to save resources for themselves. But I mean, you even see it in the blatant kind of, the flying private is so emblematic of what's happening right now, you know?
So there's a history, and it's very difficult to understand what's happening now without understanding the history. If you go back to the end of World War II, a series of decisions were made to keep the black budget and what I call the hidden system of finance secret. And as that secrecy grew and grew and grew, you had an enormous separation between the insiders and the outsiders that led to a huge cycle of disrespect between the insiders and the outsiders. And it's gotten worse and worse and worse to the point where, you know, both groups have become at the extremes unbelievably stupid. And one of the problems you see in the insiders, the more they get away with, the more they feel free to get away with. And the current generation is much more emboldened about this than, say, 3 generations ago. So many of the guys who first engineered the secrecy didn't necessarily like it and felt uncomfortable about how sort of, you know, what they were doing to the general population. Whereas as time has gone on, you're getting a very different cut of person, and they're used to it. Because remember, crime that pays is crime that stays.
Yeah.
and at some point, the criminals just decide, okay, well, they're too stupid to participate in the winnings. We don't need them. And, you know, we can debase their culture and we can control them and manipulate them. And so, you know, have you ever watched the TV series Yellowstone?
Is that Josh Brolin?
It's Taylor Sheridan is the guy who wrote it, and Kevin Costner.
Oh, it's Kevin Costner. Okay, I was thinking of the other one with Josh Brolin, but no, I actually haven't. I've seen, I think, one episode.
It's really, there's remarkable metaphoric description of what's going on globally. It's quite remarkable. But at the end of the second season, there's this group of guys called the Beck brothers. They're 2 brothers, and they're the dirty players. They assassinate people. They poison your cattle herd. They're just, you know, they're the scorpion in the scorpion frog story. They like to do harm, and they get pleasure out of it. It works for them. Anyway, so finally the Dutton family, run by Kevin Costner, decides the only way we can deal with these guys, you know, we're going to have to get rid of them. And so one of the Dutton sons was in the special forces, and he's anointed to go, you know, kill this one. The Beck brothers have kidnapped his kid, so he's having to get his kid back. Anyway, he corners one of them in the toilet, and he doesn't want to have to kill him. He just, would rather find a win-win way out of the situation. He says to the guy, why do you always do this? Why do you always do harm? Why are you dirty? Why are you forcing me to kill you? And the Beck brother looks at him and says, nobody ever fights back.
Well, yeah.
So I will tell you in my younger years, I used to try and talk to the guys who ran the system, and propose doing more win-win kind of things. And their reality was, they believed that the crowd would always support the criminal. Think of the crucifixion. The crowd would support the criminal because the criminal give them, a freer check, and the crowd will never support Jesus. So, and if you look at the history and the sort of all the financial issues, there's an argument to be made that the corruption is not just at the top, it's throughout society.
Yeah.
Anyway, so if you look at the history, we've had 70 years to fight back. And in fact, the criminals have always been able to buy us off with a little bit bigger check, financed with debt for which we're liable.
And do you see UBI as a big part of this scheme?
Who's UBI?
Universal Basic Income, I think it's called, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, UBI is, I have a wonderful ally who says all government money comes with a sock in the jaw, but that one's, you could say to goodbye to your brain when UBI is over.
Yeah.
Or up, yeah.
And you know what? Young people want it. Like the young generation, they've bought the idea that, if we get UBI, we can stop working in jobs we hate and sit around creating art. Like that's ever going to happen. It will just destroy everybody psychologically.
So and here's the problem. And some of this relates to the entrainment that they use on all the digital technology, but, it is very hard for somebody who's not a psychopath to fathom what they have planned for us. So those young people can no more fathom what's coming than the man in the moon.
Yeah.
They just can't fathom it because they would never do that.
I also think they are completely corrupted by their self-curated social media feeds, which I've said this before on the show, Catherine. I believe it's really true. There's a book called The Shallows. It's about, I guess, maybe 10 years old. It was written by a fairly significant academic who suggests that interfacing with the internet specifically and social media more so is impacting our ability to think deeply about things and to think in nuanced ways on big issues. And
so I think it's much worse than that. If you go to Solari and put in mind control in the search box, you'll pull up a link called Mind Control Tactics used on young people and children and everyone else. I had a meeting with a wonderful group of grandparents in the Memphis area.
Yeah.
And their number 1 through number 10 question is, what is being done to my grandchildren and how do I help my grandchildren? And so I put together this group of links for them about how sophisticated electronic and digital technology works to manipulate people's minds. And there's a wealth of links, including from a couple people who are helping the military use mind control and what's called psychoelectric weapons. And I think the electronic and digital mind control, we're talking about very powerful, sophisticated stuff that's designed to dramatically influence what you think and how you think. And it's being used on these smartphones. It's being used. When I was dealing with a litigation, I faced it. And I first started to talk a lot about it because as an investment advisor, I discovered it was being used to market fraudulent investments to some of my clients.
Right.
And they literally could not understand what was happening to them unless I was able to prove to them that this technology existed. It had been developed for years and they had to be able to protect themselves from it.
And, I think that, I don't know if you both know this new phrase that's being used by people called the current thing, right? There's a phrase, I support the current thing. And it's kind of ironic because it's suggesting this idea that there have been these kind of mob mentality latching on to certain things that were foolish, right? Like, well, we just saw it this week with the abortion decision that was leaked. They were able to kind of to manifest a mob pushback in order to serve political ends, in my view, without anybody actually discussing what's in Roe v. Wade. What does it actually mean? Is it actually going to change law? It was just this giant mob of people who were activated almost by the Democratic Party. And we saw that, we've seen it around Ukraine too, the same thing. It's part of the current thing that the mob supports for a minute without thinking about it. And the fact that maybe we're heading toward nuclear war. And the same with COVID vaccines. It's all the same people with the same, I guess they're all left of center. I would say that probably about them.
So let me break down. Let's talk about abortion.
Yeah.
My intuition is that a great deal of the current abortion debate relates to two items. One is the pharmaceutical and biotech industry, and I also believe the synthetic food industry, have an enormous demand for fetal tissue.
Right.
And organs, fresh organs.
Yeah.
And I've investigated more into this area than I want to. Bobby Kennedy has a wonderful interview on Truth in the second season, where he talks to a doctor about how they harvest organs from children who are aborted at birth, is what they call it. And now they're passing laws. Now they're passing laws in the United States to allow abortion up to 2 months after birth.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's ridiculous. Okay. I know.
Right.
I know.
And I think that is probably one of the reasons why the court have been addressing this. I don't know. Anyway, so you have this demand for human flesh that is absolutely evil beyond imagination. And of course, nobody can talk honestly about why they're really pushing. And so what they do is they finance all these front groups who have all these different reasons why they're for the policy that will give them the fetal tissue that they want. Okay, so
yeah, and those front groups seem to capture young people. They capture young people who are not thinking it through.
Right, absolutely, right, absolutely. So that's number one. Number two is, if you want to break up the United States, which they do, because the institute tyranny, the United States is one of the most difficult, and different states within the United States are the most difficult to, they've never been able to get gun control. And the people who are doing this are the people who tried very hard on many occasions to get gun control.
Yeah.
Anyway, so to break up the United States, you need to really break up and divide different local institutions, whether it's civic institutions, churches, city councils, anything you can do to divide and conquer and rip the fabric of political discourse. And you have a series of different issues related to sex that have been used very effectively to do that. This is one of them. And it's a way of destroying the kind of cooperation and intimate consensus within local areas that can stop things like a constitutional convention. So these are tactics that are very useful for breaking up the country, if that's what you're trying to do.
And you think they are, do you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the funny thing. I had an eruption the other night on the high wire. Del Bigtree said conspiracy theorist once too many times, and I just reared back and I said, look, I'm a conspiracy foot soldier. I was doing, I was brought up to engineer conspiracies my whole life. I've been part of thousands of conspiracies, and I grew up in a world where people were powerful and they used conspiracies to build their future.
Yeah.
One transaction, you build the future one transaction and one project at a time. And it always involves investment, always involves resources. It always involves money. And of course, you always do it as a conspiracy because you need to keep your mouth shut, because if you don't, people will stop. I'm not saying these are illegal. I'm just saying conspiracy is the fundamental, tool that people use to build their future. Now, if you denigrate them, then you're going to be helpless and powerless and clueless about how the world works. So just stop with this, because, if you, we don't need to talk about whether there is a conspiracy or not. We have proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that there are millions of them. That, we need to get in the business of starting and running and operating successful conspiracies, because that's what wins. Right.
And I think what's happening organically, Catherine, is also the idea. I hear this on the show all the time from like-minded people, that it's becoming more and more difficult to live around the people who were captured. There's so many off-limit subjects right now with people that I kind of felt, and the truckers movement did this for me. I want to be around people who get it. I don't want to be arguing with my neighbor. And so that division is as strong here in Canada, in a sense, as it is in the States right now. And I do say once a week to my husband watching the news, are they purposely trying to destroy the country? Are they doing this on purpose?
They are. Yeah, of course. Sometimes the obvious is true.
Right. Well, I keep watching. I'm not a finance or money person in any significant way, but even stupid me is watching the constant money printing, and we're going to give Ukraine $30 billion. We're going to give, we're going to forgive student debt. So I'm just thinking, like, how after the COVID economy crash, how can they do this?
Well, but I just did the equity overview in the Solera report, and I do it once a quarter. And I took the top 8 weapons manufacturers who were just invited to the Pentagon, and I took the sort of their general market share in the last year that defense contracts were available, and I said, okay, if the administration is going to send 23 billion plus to the Ukraine, and they get the same market share that they got last year, and we take the operating margin from their annual financial statements, how much are they going to make? So the number one is going to make about 500 to 600 billion. And if you look at how their stock trades, that's another 12. That's 500 to 600 million. That's 12 billion increased market share. So, they added, it was going to be 3 billion for Ukraine. And then the numbers came out that the U.S. economy, GDP, had contracted over 1% in the first quarter, and suddenly it went to, adding another 20 billion. But I don't know if you've heard this. Apparently, the 8 billion for economic aid is going to the Office of Disinformation, which is run by the singer.
Right? I know. So what do you make of Ukraine? I mean, obviously, anybody who knows anything about foreign policy and the history of the region would suggest that Russia was actually goaded into this. I'm not forgiving what they did, but that's pretty clear. And the other thing for me too, Catherine, is it's also eminently solvable, right? He said why he invaded. It was about NATO. He didn't want to have all this trouble on his border, which they've been saying since the Soviet Union broke up. So it's kind of an easy fix. And yet everybody is absolutely committed to escalate. And now he's talking nuclear war. Like, I don't know how we got here. These people feel like they're insane to me. And the torpor amongst the sort of the body politic to not fear the way they should where this is going is really, really unsettling for me.
So if you look at the Anglo-American alliance, they continue to want to build a unipolar world.
Yeah.
And Russia, China, and the BRIC nations want a multipolar world. And so there's a fundamental win-lose disagreement. And if they're going to build a multipolar world, they need to basically they need to destroy Russia's sovereignty. So they need to destroy Russia as a true independent political enemy or entity. And so this is about, So we have steadily been breaking our agreements with Russia and constantly encroaching through NATO on their territory. And if you look at what they need to buffer Moscow on their territory, we have encroached and broken all of our agreements. And it's what Lavrov said is true. Said the Americans are not agreement capable. We don't keep our word.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that you see such an opposition to the sort of Anglo-American alliance right now is that there are so many different countries and entities around the world who can't function trading and doing business with a partner who doesn't keep their agreements. So,
yeah. And well, I guess the other side of it for me too is watching, I do kind of dive into legacy media once in a while, even though I always regret it. But you have to know what they're doing, right? And I see these people like Adam Kinzinger and Nancy, but these completely not serious people. Like I feel like we are governed in all Western countries right now by not serious people. They're just not that smart.
So, I think there are a couple problems. One is if you look at who really runs things, I don't think anybody who is held out as running things are really running things. My experience is they're not really running things. So I do think there is a deep state and it's running a lot of things. And the people in the deep state that I've experienced now, I experienced an older generation are remarkably capable. I'm not saying I agree with what they do and how they do it, but they're quite capable. Think of it, if you ever watch the James Bond movies, think of it as Spectre.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're
Yeah.
dealing here with Spectre. And one thing you can say about Spectre is, they're competent at what they do. Now, increasingly, part of breaking up the country is destroying the brand. And so you put people, forward as running the country that, you make it look like Idiocracy. Is what, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Idiocracy.
No, I haven't actually.
Okay, well,
It's a good word.
Yeah, it's not so wonderful, but you're talking about a serious debasement of the culture and of the mind and of the IQ. If you look at how IQs in the West, particularly in America, have fallen over the last 10 years, 20 years, it's frightening. Because we are talking about dropping IQs below a point if they stay on their current decline, of most IQs dropping to the point where people can't function in modern society.
And you use the phrase debasement did you say of society or of the culture? And it's really interesting you would use that phrase because we talk about that a lot around here. Even just looking at the pictures of the women going into the Met Gala in these outfits they show every body part, right? It's stripper outfits now.
So think of it this way. When people have when they have strong families and strong cultures, you can't control them. Yeah. That's why if you look at the Constitution and the basis of the democratic process, it was deemed you needed people who had a greater faith than just, how to make money. And they had strong families, because families are the greatest risk management tool ever created. But they had strong cultures based in values of things that were worth much more than money. If you don't have a strong culture, then you can't have the rule of law, because the rule of law, cannot be affirmed and held up by the marketplace. If anything, the marketplace tends to compromise the law. And so you need your legal structure to be vested in your cultural values and not in, what makes it a trade profitable today.
I read a piece and actually interviewed Max from the Gray Zone. They did a great piece on the use of digital ID and banking in India, and he said people are actually dying there because there are screw-ups in the digitization, and people are, for long periods of time, unable to buy food and access their money and things. So,
right.
Yeah, it's a remarkable article, actually. I didn't even realize they were doing it over there.
Yeah. So these systems will be used to implement total control. And, it's not just they can shut off your money. If you don't take your kid down to the vaccine center and get them the latest vaccine every 6 months, they can shut off your money. They can even take your kid.
Yeah. Which they threatened to do, by the way, to the truckers. They said they were going to come and get the kids who had attended with their parents, and
Right.
they also threatened to take their dogs away and put them down. Imagine that. Yeah, just absolutely grotesque. Something was revealed. Something has been revealed, and I think it's awakened a lot of people in the last 2 years, because there's a level of cruelty that's attending the way that's been exposed, right, in a very acute way. I mean, the idea that you would say that, and also, and this is something you alluded to earlier, the absolute demonization of anybody who is not down with the program as it's being written, right? They're white supremacists, they're Nazis, they're this, they're that. Even Joe Biden said, I think the day before yesterday, he said, oh, this MAGA movement is like terrorism. So anybody who's not voting Democrat is a terrorist now. And it's working, right? It's working.
Well, I call it the shriekometer. And basically the theory of the shriekometer is that if it's not working, just double down on the shrieking.
Yeah.
And you keep double downing on the shrieking. Now, where the entrainment and the mind control can support it, it works for some period of time. Their problem is with interest rates rising and the CPI and inflation rising, it erodes their ability to keep people in the trance. And there seems to be some connection between I'll go along, call it the story of I am good. I'll go along with your lie as long as I get my check. But when the check that I'm getting can only buy half of what it would buy last year, then you're recutting the deal and I'm not going to go along with the lie. So you have a lot of things happening that are eroding the lie, whether it's the, people being disabled from the injections or even killed, or, CPI and inflation going up, interest rates going up. There are a lot of things that are eroding them. Now, most people don't want to talk about it publicly or openly, but I would say the plan is in real trouble. And one of the examples of why the plan is real trouble, there's a lot of factionalism at the top. So if you want central control, then the medical guys are going to try and deliver central control, and the NATO guys, the military guys, are going to try and deliver central control, and then the food guys are going to try and deliver central control. So you have all these different cartels, and they're all competing to deliver central control. That's part of why it feels so incoherent, because think of it as like a corporation with 12 vice presidents, and they're all trying to give the chairman what he wants. And meantime, we're having to deal with all these different cartels, with our food and with our healthcare and whatever. And each one feels, increasingly incoherent, psychopathic, and is draining our time and energy. And, but in the meantime, they're fighting to be the one who delivers central control. And it gets more and more fractious and more nuts at the top.
Can we assume, or is it maybe being too general to suggest that one of the things we can assume from what's happening is that people who get into these positions of extreme power and who revel in it the way they seem to be in all of these different places, is there a level of psychopathy that attends that kind of success? I mean, it must have been rampant on Wall Street where you were. Is that why this is happening, that there's no moral compass leading the way? Or have they deluded themselves into believing they're doing something that's actually good for us? What do you think the answer is?
So it's a combination of things. I would say the first thing I would do, if you haven't read a book called Political Ponerology,
nope,
I would encourage you to read it. It basically puts forward a hypothesis done. They say by a group of scientists working behind the Iron Curtain to understand how we experience psychopaths as a political phenomenon, because psychopaths are very good at finding each other and conspiring for political power and control. So, and the rest of the population can't fathom that people exist who don't have empathy. And so it gives the psychopaths an advantage for some period of time. And real change comes when the rest of the population can conceive that a small portion of the population are psychopaths and can find each other and, can conspire. And political ponerology was written about the say the World War II and post-World War II time. And imagine that world that now has digital technology that makes it much more feasible to centralize much more. So I think part of what is happening is psychopathy. I think part of what is happening is the digital technology and the power that it gives, and the desire people in all different lines of work or companies get to improve their performance by more central control into them. So another part of the problem is when you're the target of AI, you've got 100 different companies using AI to do what's in their best interest, and there's no AI doing what's in your best interest. You know what I mean?
Right. Yes.
So you're being overwhelmed by the swarm of AI. Okay, so part of it is the technology, and part of it is the political ponerology phenomena. But I also think part of it is the phenomena of crime that pays is crime that stays. These guys are very successful being criminals, making a lot of money from being criminals, and the crowd. I'm going to say this, Trish. We all got to hear it. The crowd supports them.
Yeah.
Now, some of it is mind control, some of it is kickback of some of the profits. But traditionally, the crowd has not supported the responsible politician. The crowd has not supported their responsible local players. The crowd has, for a variety of carrots and sticks, gone along. And, I'll give you a perfect example. I was in the middle of the litigation, and I was dealing with very serious physical harassment. I had a wonderful church. And I went to a Christian revival with about 500 members of my church. And the pastor got up. Where was it? It was in the Georgia Dome. So it was in Atlanta, but the pastor was from Dallas. And he brought George W. Bush in during the campaign on the big monitor. So he came in online, and this crowd of 100,000 African-American women jumped up cheering, including my pastor, who I was taking a spiritual warfare course with. And she had been at the DEA for years. She wasn't anymore. She retired, but she had been at the DEA. And there was nothing about narcotics trafficking by the Bushes and the Clintons that she didn't know. And in fact, her son had just missed being hit in a drive-by shooting the week before. So she knew, who the Bushes were and how they played. Anyway, she jumps up cheering for the Bush. And afterwards, I said to her, Pastor Patricia, I'm risking my life and my fortune to try and stop the corruption that these guys are doing. And you just jumped up and cheered for him. And she said, well, yeah, but he's going to be the winner. And I said, so he's the winner and I'm the loser? And she said, yeah, that's right.
Wow.
Right. So that's my pastor who's teaching me spiritual warfare.
Yeah, I know.
Because in America, everybody goes with the winner. So if Spectre's going to win, everybody says, well, they're going to win, so we'll go with them. Now,
well, I also believe very strongly, and this is kind of stating the obvious, that there's no media, or there is media access for people, but people are following the wrong media and they don't know they are yet. They're still buying into it.
I completely disagree.
Do you? Okay.
I really do. So let's say I sent an email to everyone I knew, let's say to 100 people.
Yeah.
In the email, I had a paragraph that explained how every man could have as many erections as he wanted.
Yeah.
And then the second paragraph, I explained how every woman could have as many orgasms as she wanted. And I said to everybody, promise me, this is totally confidential. Please don't share this with anybody. Please make sure, this stays entirely secret. How long would it be until everybody on the planet had a copy of that email?
Well, 15 minutes.
Maybe 30 days, okay?
Yeah.
So, this comes down, I filed this under the category Jesus did not need PowerPoints. So, if you look at why people are watching the Shriekometer, there are many logical reasons why they're watching the Shriekometer, which come down to, I want to play ball with the specter because that's how that's my coping strategy is to play ball with specter, or, I'm entrained and that's how I get my download of, entrainment and official story. So there are logical reasons why they're watching it. They don't want to know what's really going on because that's hard to deal with.
I think it's true, actually. I think you're right about that. I think it's absolutely true. So I guess we've been through what's happening, but so what do we do about it? I read somewhere that you said we should all start using cash every Friday, an idea I wholeheartedly embrace. But what else can we be doing to stop this, if in fact it's stoppable?
So there are millions of things we can do. And the important thing to understand is that you should do of those million things that you can do, you should do the ones that give you the most energy. Everybody's different. Okay. So the first thing you can do, we have an article at Solari called Coming Clean, and I suggest anybody who's interested jump on and go through it. The first thing I would do is I would do a time budget. I used to always get my clients to do a time budget. Look at the sources and uses of your time for the rest of 2022. Identify in the uses of time everything that is draining your energy or is giving support to the bad guys. The first thing you need to do is come clean. Get the bad guys out of your life. Get them out of your head. Get them out of your pocketbook. Get them out of your balance sheet. Get them out of your home. On and on and on and on and on. And because they're draining you. And then how can you take the time? Let's say you can stop 10 hours of TV watching a week. Take that 10 hours and use that 10 hours to switch where you bank to someplace which is much better for you. Or switch, use that 10 hours a week to find the local farmers and find better sources of food. Or team up with your neighbors to do a food buying club so you can get wholesale prices. There's a great terminal market in Toronto. I used to go down with a friend of mine who was a buyer for Loblaw.
Yeah.
And there were these fabulous organic fruits. I love lemons. They're beautiful organic lemons that were half the price in the grocery store. And I used to say to him, can anybody just come down to the terminal markets and buy here? He said, yeah, anybody. You just got to get up really early in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah.
But imagine starting a group of people with your neighbors and being able to get beautiful organic food down at the terminal market at half price because there were 10 of you, you could buy cartons, right?
Yeah.
So switch the time out of doing business and supporting people with integrity into something that gives you energy. And every time, think small. Every time you find a way to save yourself an hour or $1, that gives you energy, that gets the bad guys out of your life and out of your pocketbook, you're going to start to be making incremental changes that are practical, that work. And one of those things you're going to have to do in Canada is you're going to have to get this bozo thrown out of office.
I don't know how we do it. The other opposition party here, well, the Conservatives are just finally finding a voice, but the New Democrats, who are supposed to be on the side of working people, have created a kind of a quasi-coalition government with him. So he's going to be in for another cut. We're stuck with him.
So, but here's the thing.
Grotesque.
I have never been in a country or a local area that didn't have great political leaders. Okay? You have to support them. Every month or so, I give a donation. We have a couple of great leaders in the United States. I support them. I give them checks. I promote them. Whatever. You've got to find your local leaders who are really in there fighting, because you have no idea what a difference they make. So Bozo may be, running the country, but you have legislators who are good, who are fighting or making it really uncomfortable and difficult. And if only bringing transparency, and that makes such a difference. That makes such a difference. You have to support them.
Yeah, well, that's hopeful. It's some action, right? It's action.
Right. So find one. If everybody just finds the one they like and supports them, what a difference it can make.
I guess the other thing I'm wondering about too, though, is how on a large scale we end up defeating this kind of thinking. That's so we are held in such disdain by the people who govern us now that is it going to be a generation before we're able to change that? How does that work?
I would go to Sleary. I did a wonderful interview with Thomas Meyer on the story of Gideon. And it's worth listening to. It's my favorite Bible story. But I will tell you, I think we don't have the capacity to defeat these guys, and I don't think we're going to defeat them. I think they're going to defeat themselves. And we can certainly facilitate that by bringing transparency and withdrawing our support, because they only succeed because we support them.
Yeah.
So the more people who withdraw, the better. But ultimately, so I think transparency and withdrawing support and shunning can add a huge amount. But ultimately, I think they're going to fail. And the question is, okay, what's our plan? And because their plan, as little as we like it and as bad as it is for us, addresses the real problems in front of us, which is, how do we deal with resource management with a planet with this many people, particularly where there's a debasement of IQs. That's got to get turned around. So what's our plan? And that's, don't worry about defeating them. Create the conditions where they'll defeat themselves. Here's the reality. I had a choice in 1998. I could have gone along, and I didn't. And the reason is I believe their plan will fail. And to this day, I believe their plan will fail. I want nothing to do with it. I wouldn't be an insider for all the tea in China. I just think that it's going to fail.
You said that, when we come to a fork in the road, we have to pick a side.
Yep.
And you also said that we should pick the side that is paved with faith, hope, and charity, which I thought was a lovely sentiment.
Right. So you have to understand the number one programming of the mind control on this planet. You know what it is?
Secularism?
No, it's hopeless. There's nothing you can do.
Yes.
You must go along.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you've ever seen, I'm always talking about the movie, The Never-Ending Story.
Yeah.
Where the hero is dealing with the nothing.
Yeah.
So each one of us must decide how we're going to deal with the nothing. And, you have two choices. You can go along with the nothing, or you can refuse to go along with the nothing and network and act accordingly. Those are your two choices. And what I chose in 1998 is I ain't going along with nothing. So I don't have to go along. I'm not going to go along. And there are risks to not going along, but they're far preferable to me than, the risks of going along. So each one of us has to make that choice. And you just have to understand that nothing is very good at convincing you that it's hopeless. But if you buy into that, that's a choice, and you made that choice.
So should we wean ourselves off of Amazon too? Is that a good move?
So I've gotten my purchases at Amazon down 99%. I'm still struggling to get rid of the last 1%.
I know, me too.
So, yeah,
me too.
But I do everything I can to keep Amazon out of my life.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah. I know. I am absolutely thrilled to have met you, Catherine.
Well, but I want to report, Trish, that we're in cahoots now. So I want to report on how the Wim Hof works.
Yeah, I will totally give you one. I'm excited, actually. You know why? Because you've given me hope. I'm so fed up with medicine right now. I'm trying to do the FLCC thing, and that hasn't worked. I'm trying to get my family physician, who is not that engaged in treatment for COVID. He's a lovely guy, but he's just not up on it. So I feel like I've been cut loose. I'm diagnosing myself and Googling drugs online. I shouldn't be doing that. There's something wrong there.
So can I just tell you a little story?
Yes.
One of the things I'm gonna find, I wrote this up. So let me see if I can find this. What happened to me when I started the litigation, my father had been a very successful surgeon.
Yeah.
And he had taught us to totally distrust the healthcare system.
Yeah.
He was remarkable. So, and they always say doctors' kids are the worst. So I was already very careful and, skeptical. But I was totally bought into the whole system. I had healthcare insurance and disability insurance, and I was totally in the trance. So when the litigation started, I literally got to the point where it wasn't safe to go to a doctor. It wasn't safe to go to a hospital. It wasn't safe to go to the doctor. And what would happen to me, I'm going to put the link in the chat for you.
Thank you.
What happened to me was and then I had no money. I was so poor I couldn't go anyway. And I had to give up the insurance. The first thing that happened to me is I went with my cousin when I was in the process of finally giving up on the last healthcare insurance. We found the cabin that our ancestors who had come over from the East Coast to Tennessee, and they had built a log cabin with no windows, dirt floor, obviously no running water, and lived in it for the first winter. And we found the cabin and we went into it. And I'm walking around on this dirt floor, realizing a family of 10, survived the winter in this thing. And I realized, my ancestors have been on this planet for thousands and thousands of years without healthcare insurance. But it's, we didn't come all the way across the oceans and the prairies because we were made of sugar candy, as Winston Churchill once said.
Yeah.
And I realized, wait a minute, I have to rethink this. Anyway, so I went on a process of basically learning to do all my own healthcare. In an emergency, I would go to one of the local nurse practitioners who are excellent where I am, because there are times when you need antibiotics, but otherwise everything became the old-timey and natural recipes. And first of all, I learned a phenomenal amount. But one of the things I learned is if I just can't go to a doctor or a hospital for a month, I will be infinitely better off.
Yeah.
And I would never have tried it if I had a choice. I would never have tried it. I was forced to go it alone. And one of the things I found was my best navigation tool was prayer, because through prayer, I could figure out what I needed.
Yeah. Yeah.
What did my body want? What did my body need? Anyway, I put a link and I ended up writing all about it. And when I finished the litigation and I got the settlement money, and I said, okay, I've been poisoned many times. I'm very toxic. I need to spend a lot of money on my health. How am I going to budget this? And I realized I'm not going to get health insurance. Instead, I'm going to spend all my money on nutrition, excellent food, and getting detoxed, which is what I did. And it turned out to be the right decision for me. I got a very good policy through AAA for car insurance, because trauma is where we're going to need the traditional medical system. And so I had insurance to cover a car accident or a trauma transportation accident. Anyway, all I can tell you is, if you will just leave the medical system, other than needing it for very select, careful things, and go to learning and doing as much as you can yourself, you will be infinitely healthier.
Well, I've certainly done stories about iatrogenic medicine over the years, too. I think it's 100% correct. And I think COVID has made it even more clear. They don't have anything for anybody. They don't. Right. Anyway, Catherine, I'm so thrilled to meet you. And I'm going to send CJ an email thanking him for hooking us up. It's really great. And if I'm ever in Holland, I'll come knocking on your door.
Oh, it would be great. Well, I'm going to be back in the United States, hopefully September, October, November. And, CG has a new book coming out, and I'm dying to get it. It's a more collection of his essays.
Oh, brilliant. I must get it myself.
Yeah.
Yes. Happy to support him. He's brilliant. Yeah. Well, I would meet you for a coffee in the States, but I can't travel yet. So I may miss my son's graduation from university in June because our prime minister won't let me fly. And if I was going to drive it the way I drive, it would be like 6 days there and back.
So do you have a relative in the United States who can bring you in online so that you can at least be there?
Oh, well, he goes to school in Canada. I can't board a plane. I can't get on a plane in this country. I can't fly in Canada.
Can't you drive?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I could drive, but it's a long drive for me because I don't tend to drive on highways. So it would be like a 2-week effort.
Well, I love to road trip, but after Wim Hof, you might be able to do it.
Maybe I could. I used to love road tripping when I was working as an investigative journalist, mostly for CBC. The most fun for me was getting in a car somewhere in America with a pack of cigarettes and a Coke or a coffee for a long drive to some mysterious cool place in Alabama or some really interesting. I loved it. It was the highlight of my life was those trips. But I've developed a little anxiety about highway driving, and so I've got to work on that.
Okay, well, it's great to meet you, and we're in cahoots.
We're in cahoots. Okay, great. Thank you, Catherine, very much.
Have a great day.
You
Bye.
too. Bye. So that was the great Catherine Austin Fitts, and she publishes the Solari Report. Highly, highly recommend it. And she's great fun too, so that's interesting. I'd love to talk to her at some point about her life on Wall Street because she was in that kind of heavy-duty, super macho Wall Street ethos at a time when there weren't very many women doing that. And that is kind of like what my life has been like. I found myself in a journalism career at a time where women weren't doing the kind of kick-ass stuff that I was doing. So it was really interesting to be surrounded by all that male energy. So I'm always interested in women to see how they came through it and how they managed it and what compromises they had to make. So maybe we'll do a show with her just on that. Anyway, it's worth reading the Solari Report. I want to leave you with something that's kind of plaguing my mood. Maybe that's why I'm still feeling sick. But, it feels to me that there are no serious people running the world anymore. I say that a lot, but you know what? Just take this on. Let this land. The Wall Street Journal ran an opinion piece on April 27th by a guy named Seth Cropsey. I have no clue who he is. The headline was this: the U.S. should show it can win a nuclear war. What the actual hell? People are tossing this around like it's nothing. Do they not understand that once the nukes start popping, we are in serious, and to use an overused word, existential situation, right? Like, I don't understand what's going on. I do think that there is some mass psychosis going on here where learned, educated people apparently are talking casually about nuclear war and casually about America getting into war with Russia. Like it's insane. The other day, it was leaked. I think this looks like a New York Times font. Yes. U.S. intelligence is helping Ukraine kill Russian generals, officials say. So they're bragging about it, right? The spooks in D.C. are bragging about helping Ukraine kill Russian generals. So how is that not America being at war with Russia? A nuclear-armed Russia with a guy in charge who they say is a nutcase. I'm not sure I agree, but let's just say they're right about that. Why would you want to get into a hot war with a nuclear-armed nutcase, to use their words? Why would you want to do that? This just tells you it's one of those situations. Yes, the thing itself is pretty terrible, but the handling of the thing by media and people who are supposed to be serious people is absurd. It's crazy. I feel like we are sleepwalking into a very, very dangerous situation. There's a guy on Twitter who goes by the handle of Martyr Maid who says some pretty smart things geopolitically. And he says about this headline, this justifies retaliatory assassinations of U.S. officials by Russia. Hope it doesn't come to that. He's right. I mean, he's not saying they should do it, but he's saying militarily, in the minds of Putin, it may mean that. Why would you want to provoke this? And the other question I have just about Ukraine, I've said it before and I'll say it again. The only appropriate response right now is to get them to the table. Russia's got kind of the Donbass region now. Let them have it. It's all Russian speakers in there anyway. But and make a pledge to keep Ukraine out of NATO. That would end it. So I don't understand. I don't understand what's going on here. I really don't. Just one more thing on that, and then I'll stop. But there's a story out of the UK that actually came out of Pravda sources, Ukrainian Pravda sources, which is the Russian news service. Close to Zelensky, Boris Johnson, who appeared in the Capitol almost without warning, brought a simple message. Get this, that even if Ukraine is ready to sign some agreements on guarantees with Putin, the West is not. It's better grammar. Get that? So even if Zelensky wants to stop the war and save the people, his people, from dying, the West doesn't want that. Why doesn't the West want that? Right? Okay, we know, I've had people on saying they're trying to do regime change, but I don't know where they get the idea that Putin would go down without a fight, as Putin's own people are talking about using nuclear weapons. This is really, we are in a terrible state. And I'm just going to add on to the insanity of the Biden administration here that we now, over the abortion story, I'm sure you all know about it, we had yesterday a liberal website doxing the Supreme Court justices so that these kind of nutty protesters could go there and threaten them. This is off the charts, insane behavior. And, you know, she and I, Catherine Austin Fitz and I, talked about the destruction of America, the country. And I really feel it does almost feel deliberate. It's so insane. And who knows where it's going to end. But finally, you know, just I can't let this disinformation czar appointment go, obviously, because that's right up my bailiwick as a former legacy media reporter. At the idea that the Biden administration, the administration that rose to power by lying about the Trump-Russia collusion story, I mean, they just invented it. Hillary Clinton invented it, right? That's proven now. Her lawyer's in trouble. It's all come out. So they are going to go after misinformation and disinformation. And the woman they've hired to do it through Homeland Security, which, by the way, is a police agency, is someone who accuses the Republicans of being the disinformation, misinformation people. I mean, it's just astonishing that they can even do this with a straight face. So I just want to play for you, just as a reminder of where we came from, an interview on CNN with James Clapper, stepping up, former spook, stepping up to put the editorial kibosh on the Hunter Biden laptop story as Russian disinformation, when actually what he was doing was disinformation. But this is the side that's wants to be controlling what people see and hear. Listen to this.
Director, a bunch of questions from this. Let me just start with this. How much does the source matter, right? So you hear the story of this laptop. We don't know a lot. We do know that the way that this information is getting out is through Steve Bannon and Rudy Giuliani. How much does the source matter here?
Well, source matters a lot, and the timing matters a lot, I think. And to me, this is just classic textbook Soviet-Russian tradecraft at work. The Russians have analyzed the target. They understand that the president and his enablers crave dirt on Vice President Biden, whether it's real or contrived, it doesn't matter to them. And so all of a sudden, two and a half weeks before the election, this laptop appears somehow and emails on it without any metadata. It's all very curious. But so here you have a willing target, and the Russians, who are very sophisticated about how to exploit a willing target. And to me, that's what's at work here.
And so, when you try to figure out the specifics of, whether that meeting email, for example, is real in the midst of this, do you think stuff like that could just have been planted in there and be completely fake? I do. I think the emails could be contrived, particularly since, as I understand it from what I've read, they appear without any metadata. That is, from, to, and any technical data, at least immediately evident. Now, if this computer is in the hands of the FBI, they have obviously excellent, sophisticated technical and forensic analytic capabilities, and I think they'll be able to sort it out, whether this is genuine or not. But it's all pretty curious, given, again, 2.5 weeks out from the election.
So this guy, he is the former director of national intelligence, which is a very high office in the intelligence community, DNI. James Clapper, totally deep state, appointed by Obama, a Democrat, defending Joe Biden, a Democrat. And I believe that we're starting to see this now, the most corrupt president in American history. That's what it's not only, Joe Biden is he's almost a trifecta, right? He's probably, I would think he is the most cognitively compromised, certainly the most dishonest, ethically compromised, and the dumbest, right? So, this is who the Democratic Party put in office. He's the guy whose minions are now saying we need to control information. And the way they control information is with guys like James Clapper, who tells out and out lies. Everything in that interview clip was a lie, right? People knew from the beginning that the laptop was real, and there are many reasons why they did. It was obvious. But these people step forward and lie on behalf of the Democrat Party, and then they want to control the flow of information. This cannot happen. It cannot happen. And I know that there are moves afoot in this country. So whatever is happening with the Democrats in Washington, no matter how bizarre, will come here eventually to a political party near you. So we need to be watching them very closely, because the country is falling apart. It's destroying itself. I hope we never get there. Anyway, stay critical. See ya.